Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Martha's Vineyard Book Festival. We're very glad to see you here this morning on this early hour. The Book Festival honors and celebrates noted writers, researchers, novelists that have truly contributed to our society. And today, we're very excited to have a panel that's going to talk about cooking and its importance in our culture. We have Glenn Roberts, who's going to be our moderator for the panel this morning. He is a renowned plant conservationist and entrepreneur. His food companies have brought us a ready and sustainable supply of food grains to our tables that we really didn't have access to in the past. So we're very excited to have him here today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Glenn.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank everyone at the Martha's Vineyard Book Festival, including the Vineyard Gazette et al. And I'd like to kick it off by something that was classic last night that Glenn Thrush said to Dion. Dion was the moderator, and Glenn Thrush, right at the beginning of the thing, looked him square in the eyes and said, "Who needs you?" Right? And today I think that resonates more than ever. This is a historic gathering of culinary minds to my left, your right. Just extraordinary. And so instead of reading bios or going over the extensive CV that reads like salad dressing and salad ingredients off this way, with multiple publications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and impacting American food culture in modern times, we wouldn't live without them. So the one thing I will say is that we're here because we all love books. I love books, so my first thing in any of these is to go very quickly and go, I love this book. And just in case you want to know who belongs to this book, at the end of the table, Shirley Chase, right? And next, right here from the vineyard, our own six-burner Susie Middleton. These are books, if you look at them at first, you go, that's great, and then you keep looking, and they keep magnifying themselves, right? So my definition of a great book. Third, both DC alumni and the vineyard. Joan Nathan, my pal, been working with Joan for a while, and it's just amazing what she's done. This is an amazing book. So and by the way, tomorrow there's an interview with some dumb guy interviewing Joan at noon tomorrow, I believe.
So I'd rather interview him.
And last, if you live here and you really live here and you know about Island-Grown Foods and Island-Grown Schools and Island-Grown Initiative and Thimble Farm and Keith and Noli and Carol Kenny, who hides in the background, doesn't take credit for anything. There's a brain trust here, and Sarah is part of it, right? It's kind of like the culture of what goes on here. So we have Feeding the Family. It's all about what happens next, and it's all about what our kids do next, right? So without further ado, we're going to have 2 rounds of questions. It's going to go really fast, and then I'm going to bring to you these authors. You can deal with them directly. And it's always the audience that's smarter than the group mind on the panel, which is bizarre to me, but it's really true. So think about the questions you'd like to ask. There's just so much talent here, and I'll get through my part really quickly, and then we'll get to you, because it's all about what you think, not what we think. You ready? Okay. So the first, we're doing alphabetical order, by the way. So Sarah Chase is first. I'm reading this to make sure I get it right because the scope of each one of these books is massive. All right, ready? Sarah?
I'm ready.
Okay. Stuffies. Forge wild beach plums. A technique for perfect steak fiorentini. The minefield of chowder styles. I guess we all know about that. A classic understated New England 4th of July celebration meal of salmon and peas. The lesser-known micro-influences and iconic foods of our region. These concepts percolate with familiarity in your book, New England Open House. Keying on these, please share a story of one of your favorite recipes that expresses local identity and Yankee heritage.
Well, I was very happy that you put the word foraged in there because I think foraging in which you can get something for nothing is at the heart of the Yankee personality. We love thriftiness. And I come from a long family of foragers. My grandfather bought an island in the middle of Blue Hill Bay many years ago. He had 6 sons, and my mother was the only daughter. And he put the boys to work blueberrying on the island to keep them out of trouble. We would also gather mussels, dig for clams, find wild chanterelles on the island. So I grew up as part of that heritage. I've spent the last, most of my adulthood living on Nantucket and Cape Cod, and I think an ingredient that is very unique to coastal New England areas is beach plums. And I have beach plum trees actually growing in my yard now on the Cape, and I love cooking with beach plums. And the recipe in the book that I think brings together this, embedded Yankee spirit with modern New England cooking is for a warm goat cheese salad with a beach plum balsamic glaze. And it's, I wrote in the book that it was based on the warm goat cheese salad that Alice Waters made famous at Chez Panisse. However, I have since been on a Jeremiah Towers run. I just saw his movie the documentary that Anthony Bourdain produced called The Last Magnificent. We also read in my book group his California dish book, what he saw during the American Revolution, and I'm not sure that this warm goat cheese salad isn't actually Jeremiah Towers' invention, but nonetheless, I took the concept of taking a disc of goat cheese. At the time, goat cheese was coming from France or California. It wasn't such a thing in New England where lots of people were making their own goat cheese, and now they are. Seal Cove in Maine is one of my favorite purveyors. But anyway, the goat cheese is just warmed in the oven, coated with chopped walnuts, and put on a bed of the freshest, most beautiful mesclun greens you can find. And then I make the dressing by heating beach plum jams with minced shallots and balsamic vinegar, and drizzling that warm with olive oil over the greens and the warm goat cheese. And it makes for a salad that is actually food friendly with red wines, and I love to serve it, after a main course to finish off that those last sips of red wine. So that's my answer.
And now we're adjourning to go eat. Now you've discovered the pitfalls and the ideas. We're sitting here without food, listening to this. So what do you do? Next. Susie, right? Your book reminds me of a 3-dimensional sensory science flavor wheel. Why do I say this? Because I work with sensory scientists now. I didn't used to, but they're all very, very interested in old crops. So we're running flavor and blind panels on all kinds of stuff that no one would think about. And the sensory science wheel comes to mind because they put one together for the bread lab out at WSU, and Michael Calanti, who teaches at Stanford this very topic, has a sensory science wheel for bread that's spectacular. But the note there is that they're 2-dimensional. And it's easy to think about a sensory science flavor wheel by thinking about wine, where you dial up fruity and this and that and the other thing, and it pairs it with crisp on another wheel. But it's usually 2-dimensional, and it applies only to one thing. In Susie's book is that the drawing in to simple green suppers seems to reside in a casual and effortless way that you include culinary provisions, one, and then elevate everything. Those culinary provisions are available anywhere, and then pair them with fresh local garden foods. Those of us here on the vineyard, lucky enough to know your own personal garden, and certainly the 6 Burner Sue Garden Market stand, know that you're passionate about this, like getting in the dirt and doing it. So please share a favorite dish or two that describes your meal preparation philosophy that reflects the combination of provision elements and fresh garden elements.
I will do that, Glenn. And I got the perfect segue from Sarah because I originally fell in love with the vineyard because I came from a place in Delaware that had beach plum bushes, and I came up here and it just felt so familiar. And I also have, I'm going to tell you about a dish that's very similar to hers, but it's a main dish. So, but I am crazy about vegetables. I'm not really sure why, but I kind of fell in love with them. And when I went to culinary school, from a cook's point of view, they're very, very creative to work with. So I did decide I had to grow them about 7 years ago, so I've been growing them since then. And kind of my mission with my books is to help people learn to cook vegetables in a way that they're going to enjoy doing it and that they're going to be really tasty for everybody in your family, because we all want to eat more vegetables, but either people don't like them or we don't know how to cook them. So I've been working towards this book that my fourth book, Simple Green Suppers, is very exciting because it's all main dishes with vegetables in it. And when I am vegetarian, I went vegetarian about 3.5 years ago, and I figured once I did that, I was like, oh my gosh, this takes some planning to do. And little by little, I came up with a strategy, which was a perfect template for Simple Green Suppers, because I realized that I had to refresh my pantry, kind of get to know all those interesting grains, really kind of redo that and stock up with really good things. I came up with about 25 or 30 different little sauces that I could make ahead. I came up with a make-ahead strategy of cooking some things ahead over the weekend and keeping them throughout the week, so that when I come home, whether it's from the grocery store or the farmer's market or my backyard with my fresh vegetables, and I actually do this every night. I come home from work and I make a supper just like this by pulling out my vegetables. Oftentimes I've got cooked chickpeas or cooked brown rice. I've got a little farmhouse vinaigrette or a little cucumber or yogurt sauce I've made, and dinner comes together pretty quickly. And I actually wanted to point out one recipe in the book, which is funny because it's very similar to Sarah's. It's called Quick Roasted Beet, Arugula, and Wheatberry Salad. And it's sort of encompasses all of my strategies for cooking. There's something called quick roasted beets in it, which if you know my earlier books, beets are very hard, take a long time to cook. A lot of people don't like them. What I do is I don't take the skin off. I slice them thinly, spread them out in a sheet pan, toss them a little olive oil and salt, and at about 450 degrees, about 14 minutes, they turn into these delicious little nubbins. So you can make those ahead. This salad also has a little bit of goat cheese in it. It has some fresh strawberries, some arugula, and then one thing I do in the book with grains is traditionally grain salads in the old vegetarian world were like this big, huge bowl of grains and not much else. And today, I think what often people are doing, what I'm doing with the salad, is I cook the grains ahead. I've got them in the refrigerator, and then I add a little bit to my salad, which gives it some satisfaction. I add toasted pecans here too, and then I make a little dressing out of diced strawberries, balsamic, and maple, and with the goat cheese, and I sort of scatter that all on a plate, and it's kind of fun and beautiful, and it gets back to what I'm saying about I have to enjoy making this food, and it needs to be pretty and fun and delicious and not too complicated. So that's my strategy.
Fantastic. If anybody starts talking about an omelet, I'm leaving. Jeez. I'm starving. Sorry. This isn't helping, or maybe it is. Okay, for Joan. Little beknownst to everyone here, there's other things that Kay Rensler, my wife, and I do. One of them is to support the Carolina Gold Rice Foundation worldwide, which I'm the president, and in those efforts, we work ex situ, which means we work with scholars in Israel and Palestine. And unbeknownst to many people, in my world of cereals, oilseeds, and legumes, there are no barriers between Palestine and Israel, even with what's going on with Hamas and everything else. Those farmers go back and forth across the border unstoppable, right? And all the foodways go back and forth too. And we're lucky enough to have an insight here And why do we work ex situ in Israel, Syria, Ukraine, et cetera, which if you read Joan's book, we're just walking down the timelines that she talks about to Babylonia. And so this question sounds ultra simple, but it's not. And one of the things that bounds out of the book is, Joan, you play a pre-meal food game with friends and family called Old World, New World. I love this. One of your core ideas about influence is diaspora and tradition within the broadscape of Jewish foods and their history and migration to the New World touches upon this game, which speaks volumes to me as I think through the dozens of Food Heritage Foundation concepts you cover in King Solomon's Table. Please share with all of us the details of this game, using a modern American plate of food as an example of something that might surprise us if we categorize these elements according to their historic place-based identity, Old World, New World, and their path to our modern table. And when I told Joan about this question, she said, "What?" Right? Go for it, Joan.
Okay, well, first of all, I've admired Sarah for years, and I was so delighted to meet her last night.
Likewise.
And Susie, I want to come over for lunch.
She's been asking me
And
that.
I've already given this to my daughter, who's about to have twins, so there we go.
Yeah.
And Glenn, oh my God, Glenn, okay. So I was going to talk about something else, but I will talk about this.
You can talk about something else, too. It's all right.
Listen, I have no control about what I say, but anyway, and I was going to talk about blueberries since you were talking about beach plums, and one of my favorite things to do here is, but I'm going to talk about something else, is pick blueberries that I learned from my big sister, Lee Sinai, who's here. I just saw her walk in. She just calmly picks blueberries with her dog. I don't have a dog, but it's one of my favorite things to do, and there's a wonderful blueberry recipe in my book, and you'll have to read my book to get the great story behind it. But, okay, Old World, New World, I have played this game for years. Tomatoes, when I look at a recipe, tomatoes, New World. Eggplant, Old World. But since you mentioned rice, I think I'll tell, there's a recipe in my book for saffron rice. And I realize this is a book that has, a recipe that has gone through history. Rice started in China, and it was brought over to, right?
Yeah. Yes. Don't ask me, go for it.
Brought over to the Fertile Crescent. And it was late that it came here because people would eat gruels before then. And when it hit the Fertile Crescent in Iran and Iraq, it became a favorite of Jews for Friday night and for Shabbat because a crust would form on the bottom. So they brought this with them as Jews wandered around the world. And the recipe that I have for saffron rice, simple. You just basically soak the rice for a little bit, and the Iranian women will soak it 3 times. Even though they don't have to today, they will soak it 3 times just because that's what they did. And then you just cook it with water and I use a skillet that is, what do you call it? A nonstick skillet, but I put saffron in, so it's bright yellow. And then I cover it, and it gets crusty on the bottom, and serve it with fish or meat. I mean, I have a Libyan fish dish called ahraimi that I serve with it with lots of peppers, New World, tomatoes, New World. That is a Friday night dish. Or I'll have a chicken with preserved lemons, Old World, that I love to make. But the thing about this rice dish is that it started in Iran, came to Israel, came from Iran and Iraq to Spain, and then it came from Spain to Greece, to Turkey, and to France. And sometimes it came directly from Iraq or Babylon, then Babylonia, then Baghdad, to the south of France. When the rabbinic center changed from Babylonia to the south of France, they brought the recipe and you'll see it in lots of southern French cookbooks, but also they brought the rice. So the Camargue rice, which is in the south of France, this red rice, was brought by Jews because they missed their rice. And then they brought it to where? Charleston, South Carolina, for their pilafs. And so you see, as the migration of Jews in each dish, in some because of their big appetites, and also because Jewish food is not rooted in one place. It's the laws of kashrut that are rooted, but not, that's what roots Jews, even if they don't observe them. And it goes around the world. And Jews have always been, in some way, in the grain business from the ancient times. I talked too long, I'm sorry.
No, not at all.
But they didn't plant the grain, they would buy it, and I think this is the first, I actually, going back to Leah again, I asked her husband about this, the stock exchange, the idea of futures is the first futures was grain. So, in other words, Jewish merchants would buy the grain after it was harvested, they'd put it in a silo, then they'd sell it when it was scarcer, so they'd make more money. I mean, yeah.
And the roots of this, in pre-industrial global terms, were not necessarily asset and capital, it was biosecurity. And you see Sephardi culture reflecting all the pressures of famine and biosecurity from top to bottom in their foodways, which gets to the second question I'm going to ask Joan, and I can't wait to hear the answer.
Wait,
But that's in a minute.
one other thing,
Oh,
I just
go.
want to tell, it goes back to Joseph
Yeah.
and his brothers. What did they say? They saved grain.
Yes.
I mean, it's just, and as King Solomon said, there is absolutely nothing new under the sun. I mean,
That's
these are
right.
things that have been repeated throughout history.
We
And I'll
forget that dowries
I get
were in
very-
pasta,
What?
right? We forget that dowries were measured in pasta, made from emmer, mother grain, right? So if you were going to get married, depending on how much pasta you had to trade, it was an asset in dollars. So not only was the whole grain part of an asset culture, so was processed grain to pasta. So beautiful pasta, by the way. Yum, yum. Okay. And Sarah. Okay. The things that strike me about feeding a family. The fact that you pinpoint local and foreign influences in closely held traditional family foods across New England, which I thought was killer. I love that these are personal, right, and occasionally celebratory, and they offer easy preparation, colorful appeal, and complementary flavors. And it's really cool if you just take the book and look at it like a fast swipe on when you zip something, you just see the colors like float like this across the pages in the photographs, because it was obvious you were thinking on all these levels at once for every one of those recipes, which I think is really amazing. Please tell us how your family meal ideas evolved to include Ashley Moriarty's tortilla soup in Vermont, Gina Solon's herb pasta with mussels and leeks in West Tisbury, Elspeth Hayes' ratatouille pie in Wellfleet, and Ashley Kenner's fish, corn, and saffron chowder from Providence. Not that you have to detail all those dishes, but just to make sure we all understand your foundation idea, which is what I'm really asking you.
Sure.
Please begin and then relate to these other pinpoints. Briefly tell us about how your family meals and your Boston neighborhood Greek restaurant as a child affected all of this.
Sure. Well, I
Here it
think,
comes.
I think
All right.
at the heart of it, feeding a family is a celebration of the home cook. And not only the home cook, but really the mother who feeds her family every day, 3 to 10 meals a day, depending on how many children you have. And so, you know, when I think what you're asking is what my inspiration for family meals is. And when I started to think about that, I was thinking about my family and luckily my 2 grandmothers are still alive. And I think back to what inspired them as home cooks. And really, one of my grandmothers is from Wisconsin and the other is from Worcester. So they were all about what's available in their grocery store. One lived on a farm, what's around them. And they brought those traditions to me. But I think that combined with what's around us, and for me as a modern home cook and a mother and trying to kind of juggle all of these things in 2017, the grocery stores of my time are very different from my grandmother's. The food media is very different. And despite the fact that I've lived in New England my whole life, I have not traveled the world, I have not gone to culinary school, I am a mom who cooks for her family, I am exposed to a million different food stories and cultures through my grocery store, through magazines, through, you know, the chef's table, through Mind of a Chef, through all these things that I just soak up like a sponge. So I think it was really interesting because you got me thinking about how the modern home cook is influenced by all of these things around the world, even if we live in a very small place like I do in Martha's Vineyard. So I think, long story short, there's that piece, but then most every recipe in this book, and certainly the 4 guest recipes that you mentioned, are really influenced from family memories. And I think all of us in this room are food lovers because we're all here, and I think even if you've dined at the best restaurants in the world or have taken these amazing trips and eaten food, I would challenge you to disagree that your strongest food memory is not with your family cooking or eating together. So almost every recipe in this book is either inspired by something that I did as a child or with my children, or trying to recreate that feeling in my home. And the reason why I invited these other 4 women to contribute to this book is, one, I really wanted to celebrate the voices of modern home cooks. I think that those people who cook every day tirelessly for those they love don't get heard from enough. And I only got to include 4, but I would love to include hundreds. And so I just wanted to ask them, like, what makes dinner a success at your house? How do you do it? I mean, I know it's hard to cook dinner every night. And so they shared with me what works for them and these 4 recipes, and very similarly, you know, Gina's mussels and Caesar salad, the salad's inspired from a salad her husband had as a boy, who he still remembers this, and she cooks it for him. Elizabeth Hayes' ratatouille pie is her mother's recipe, and she had to call her mom and say, what's the recipe? And she said, I don't have a recipe. Mom, you have to write down something. I need to put it in a cookbook. So she's like, all right, give me a couple weeks. I'll play around with it. So now that recipe is written down in here. And Ashley Kenner's fish stew recipe is because her family does a soup swap party after Christmas every year.
That was really cool.
And she's from Rhode Island, so this fish stew is like one last year, and it's totally reminiscent of that moment. And Ashley Moriarty's slow cooker chicken tortilla soup is her mom's from England and had a traditional roast chicken every Sunday. And now Ashley takes that, her mom lives next door to them still, takes that chicken, puts in her slow cooker, and makes a quick dinner for her busy family. So I didn't even ask these people to connect their recipes to their family memories, but of course that's what happens, right? And I also invited their voices to contribute to the book because, going back to my grandmother's, for my college graduation, one of my grandmothers gave me her Betty Crocker cookbook with the 3 rings. And my other, I can still remember my mom getting Silver Palette, and that was like the one cookbook she had, and would cook from it.
Hello.
Exactly.
And now we're all here.
Now we're all here.
Hey.
But now I forget what I was talking about. That's okay. Oh,
You're
and
too
so, and so I, along with those books in my house, so we had those cookbooks, and then we had kind of like the church cookbooks, the PTO cookbooks, and I feel like modern parents don't have that kind of neighborhood collection of recipes as much as I feel like my mom and grandma had. So I wanted to kind of sprinkle that in a little bit, but I think that could be a lovely book on its own anyway. But finally, to talk about the Greek restaurant. So I grew up in a suburb of Boston, and you know, for celebratory things like high school graduation or birthdays, there was one fancy restaurant in town that was called 4 Star, and we would go, me and my sister and my parents, and we'd get egg lemon soup and all, you know, things that I had never tasted or seen. So one of the spring dinners in this book is a skillet spinach pie. It's a really simple one-pot spinach with feta and dill and lemon, and just baked in a cast iron skillet with phyllo on top. And it can be messy and crazy, and it doesn't have to look perfect, tastes delicious. And that was kind of how I remembered that amazing childhood memory and made it into a quick weeknight dinner.
Very cool.
Yeah.
On the soup swap, to pass it around the panel to cover a very quick basis in Charleston, that Yankee tradition, Sarah, which is where we're going next, that Yankee tradition, because of the Cape Maritime Exchange before Revolution, is translated in a bread swap on the High Holy Days and around Christmas in Charleston that was still extant in the early 80s, but went away during that decade. The bread swap for the Jewish community was rice challah. It was rice bread. And everybody else in town was doing some version of challah, but they didn't even know it, right? And Michael Shemtoff owns Butcher and Bee. It's big on meze, it's big on soups, and that rice challah is in the background, and they serve it every day now. And it's really cool. He picked up this tradition, which started up here, that swap thing. It's amazing how these things intertwine. So, for Sarah, this is now the lightning round, everyone. So we've got about 3 minutes on each of these questions. I know you're all pros, so I'm gonna, these are short, and I'm gonna go really fast. Sarah?
Yes.
Way down there. New England Open House keys on proud regional culinary heritage. I wonder if your experience can be distilled to a descriptive term in the same way that the term Southern food conjures visions of the Southern table. Particularly, what is your response when considering the term Yankee table in that same vein? What, in your opinion, then unifies New England heritage cookery within that concept?
Okay. Well, first I have to say I'm fascinated by Southern cooking. My son just completed his first year at the College of Charleston.
Nope.
And
Cool.
sometimes I contemplate having my next cookbook be about Southern exposure
Please.
from a Yankee point of view. But I
Yeah.
think he's got to get his grade
be
point
very
average
cool.
up a little bit more to make me
Uh-oh.
feel secure to commit to writing the book. But anyway, to answer the question about Yankee food, I think it's loyalty to place. As I traveled around New England, and in my own experience, people have places they go year after year after year in New England. There was just an article in the Wall Street Journal Friday section, in the mansion section, on summer houses on Nantucket versus summer houses on Martha's Vineyard. And there's this long-standing rivalry. Either you go
What's
to the vineyard.
Nantucket?
Either you go to the vineyard or you go to Nantucket. My family has this long tradition of going up to Blue Hill, Maine. Other people go to Newport, Rhode Island. And as I tried to figure out how to encapsulate New England in a cookbook, I knew that I couldn't do every place in New England. So I had anchors in each of the 6 New England states. In Connecticut, I had the Litchfield Hills. In Rhode Island, I had the Bristol-Newport area. Massachusetts, of course, was the Cape and Islands. Maine was the Penobscot Bay area. Vermont, I couldn't decide upon. Every town that began with a W I fell in love with, but I said that can't be a criteria. I just love this tradition of going back to the same place over and over again, and loving that, no oysters taste better than the Martha's Vineyard oysters. No scallops taste better than the Nantucket Bay scallops. No blueberries are better than the wild Maine blueberries. And in the early 90s, I did a book with my brother called Saltwater Seasonings, Good Food from Coastal Maine, and we were trying to capture the simple Maine ways of cooking before Maine got so glamorous as Portland is becoming now. And I just on a little aside, I did stay away from the urban areas when I was doing this New England Open House Cookbook because I wanted to capture rural traditions and home cooking. But anyway, in this main cookbook, somebody that we had interviewed said, the less you do to it, the better it is. And I think that that's the simple philosophy of Yankee cooking, celebrating a place you love and the foods that come from it in a very simple way.
And food that's free. Okay, next for Susie Middleton, and I could equally ask this of Sarah Waldman. This is I think this has the best arc of any of the questions so far, because you're in a position to answer this one without trying to figure out what I'm asking you, which I know is daunting for everyone else.
It really is.
Okay, Susie, it's the dead of winter on the island here, Martha's Vineyard. If you're from off, as we say, or from America, since I live in an airplane and my wife lives here year-round, I'm an American, and those of us in the vineyard that believe in that say, if you leave here, you go to America. So if you haven't heard that before, that's where we are. There's a little xenophobia going on here, and this is a xenophobic question. It's the dead of winter on the island. Your garden is laid by, meaning it's all covered up with ground cloth, probably. It's raining and threatening to ice up outside. That's about typical. What ingredient combination from scratch to a finished dish that provides comfort and warmth springs into your mind, and why?
Well, this is actually an easy one to
Yeah.
answer. But just backing up a little bit, I had a farm for about 7 years, and I remember the moment when I cooked a Thanksgiving dinner from all of our own vegetables and a local turkey. And it took me a long time to get to that point, to be able to strategize on holding food and growing food, but it was incredibly rewarding. But I don't do that anymore, but I have taken away from that how to keep things through the winter, and root vegetables, onions, butternut squash, locally grown on Martha's Vineyard, bought at Morning Glory or some other place at the end of December. You will have them through the cold winter months. The other thing that a lot of you probably know that grows really well out here in the winter is kale. So often we have it even when the snow is covering it. So I have a great technique which I introduced in Fast, Fresh, and Green. I learned it from a chef when I was an editor at Fine Cooking magazine. And I've carried it through and used it. And this is incredibly versatile. It's called a slow saute or a crowded saute. And it can be done in a cast iron skillet, or it can be done in a nonstick skillet. I've done it in many different ways. Originally it had a lot of olive oil in it, and you can still go that way. But instead of a traditional saute, which is high heat, you don't crowd the pan, you throw things in, you cook quickly, this is just diced root vegetables, potatoes, sweet potatoes, carrots, celery root, anything you've got. Same size, you don't have to worry about it being perfect diced, just cut them into about the same size. Get your olive oil going in your skillet, nice and hot. Add your vegetables, cover it for a little while, and just stir till about 15 or 20 minutes. They're going to start to brown on the bottom, and then the steam from the root vegetables is going to help cook the other root vegetables. It's really interesting how it works. About halfway through, the other thing that keeps so well in the winter is any kind of allium, onions, shallots, garlic. Also an important part of my flavor layering that I do, which we talked about earlier, is alliums are just incredible for that. But onions can burn if you cook them for too long, so I add them about halfway through, and then continue to cook until the vegetables are tender. Sometimes I added some herb sprigs in while I'm cooking. At the end, a little bit of chopped garlic, just softened with the saute, so I've got these browned, yummy, delicious caramelized vegetables. And then I have an option of, sometimes I'll put a little finishing sauce, like a little lime and soy sauce, or the balsamic and maple. Sometimes not. They're delicious right out of the pan, or they are delicious folded into couscous or rice, or into a tortilla for a taco, which is a lot of what I do in Simple Green Suppers in terms of turning your vegetables into dinner, and amazingly filling, really. And that's something you can make completely out of what you've got at home.
All right, I'm ready. Tacos? Yeah. All right, thank you. That was killer. Joan? Sorry, but, all right. Actually, this one's pretty straightforward. What familiar New World dish on the modern American table evolved from Old World, ancient, famine foodways? Please share your thoughts on why the dish should make us pause and reflect on its antiquity today.
Okay, well, again, there are two things. I'll just quickly say, any kind of gruel that we eat, any kind of gruel that we eat is started in the Old World. And the gruel that is very modern, gluten-free, is one of the oldest dishes known to mankind. And this is a chickpea pancake that I have in my book. When I was researching it and I looked in old European cookbooks, they said, well, you know, it started with farinata in Italy in the 19th century, or soca from Nice in the 19th century. And I thought, wait a second. Then I looked at the Epics of Gilgamesh. There it is, chickpea flour. It was one of the flours. And what's so interesting is because chickpeas grow in soil that has very little water and grow well in soil, this is a dish of the past, and it will be a dish of the future. And it's really good. Your guests will love it. What I do is I just soak chickpea flour in water overnight with a little bit of salt and some turmeric, some cumin, some other old world seasonings. And then I take it out and I saute, put a little olive oil, old world, in a nonstick frying pan, heat it up, and I also at the same time heat up a 500-degree oven with a brick in it or something, or brick or pizza, what do you call it? Stone. And then I fill it with sauteed vegetables, either fennel, old world, or onions, or any kind of onion. And I just play with it. Sometimes I put olives on top. Anyway, so that I saute the onion and the fennel, put it in the pan, then cover it with the chickpeas, and put it in the hot oven, and then cover it sometimes just for 10 minutes. That's it. And I bring it out. Before I can even cut it in pieces, people have just grabbed it and eaten it. It's a wonderful either main course lunch, and I bring it straight, you can see it in here, just straight from the cooked stove to the table, putting on maybe some greens, Swiss chard, old world on top of it, and it's so modern.
Fabulous.
For the gluten-free.
Yes, yeah, okay. So, Sarah? I'm fascinated by the generational, let me start it. I'm fascinated by the generational imperative expressed in feeding a family. It's really vital. By this I mean the visual and textural contrast in a dish that draws your children into the kitchen and appeals to your entire family. Everyone's part of the process. The contrast and harmony in assigning culinary tasks to children also amplifies, in your book, and should be everywhere, a meta-reality of nutritional excellence. Please tell us how you see the unspoken tactile and inclusive preparation of foods in the home as a child's nutrition learning experience.
Well, again, I think I could write a whole book about that.
I think you should. I'm serious.
And before, there's a few big ideas I wanted to talk about, but before I say that, the Feeding a Family does have very concrete bulleted lists of action items of how to cook with kids and feed kids and people who feel really lost and want to regain confidence in that area. But I think before you dive in and start really with a new plan in your kitchen with those, you need to step back and kind of think about the big picture. And there's a few things that come to mind. First, if I think about how my parents grew up and my grandparents, picky eaters were not a thing. I mean, and I'm not talking about food allergies or sensitivities, but I really think that we need to have confidence in our kids that they can eat real food with us. We don't need to dumb it down, make it a shape or a color. They're small humans, and you know, their nutrition is almost more important than ours. So one, I would say, believe in them. They can eat real food. Give them the chance. The second, I would say kids love choice and to feel a part of it. I think if you're coming at them as the powerful one, here's dinner and you have to eat it, especially with some temperaments, that's not going to be a long-term solution. So I think inviting them into the process, whether it's looking in a book and picking out something they want to make, bringing them to the grocery store and not saying, you know, choose anything in the store, but do you want this vegetable or this vegetable? My kids peel carrots, rip kale if they're feeling they're boys, so they spin lettuce. I mean, whatever they want. My older one he's just writing, so he likes to make place cards for the table. If they don't want to cook, they don't have to, but it's participating in the planning, the cooking, and the meal. And they're part of the team, they're invested and feel really proud of it. I think lastly that as a modern parent, so I'm 35, my kids are 4 and 7. I have to check in with myself often, is really pull back and say, how much time a week do we spend on soccer? How much time a week do we spend on watching a cartoon? How much time a week do we spend on cooking and eating as a family? And even though this is my work, and I still have to check in with that balance, and I think that modern parents really need to check in with that balance, and we need to make cooking and eating together as high as a priority as those other things that we do, if not higher. And that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice things that your family loves. It just means you need to put the value in it that we all know how valuable it is, and really show your children that that is as important as your love of hockey, if not more.
Good, well stated. You got it. Okay, we have 5 minutes for Q&A, and this is where the fun starts. First, questions? Yes?
For Sarah, so you were involved with the Silver Palette Cookbook.
Yes.
And another 2 cookbooks, and now you have your next one that came out. How has cooking changed since you started back then to now? Developing recipes.
Well, there's always all these different trends going on. I remember in the first book I did on my own, the Nantucket Open House Cookbook, I called for fruity olive oil rather than extra virgin olive oil. And everybody would always ask me when I would teach cooking classes, what is fruity olive oil? And I said, you know, it's an olive oil that actually tastes like the oil was extracted from an olive. And then there was a phase where you were supposed to eat raw eggs. I mean, I love making all kinds of aioli and homemade mayonnaises, and you had to go through a whole thing of writing a disclaimer that you shouldn't eat raw eggs. Now, that's sort of fallen by the wayside. My husband was one of the first people to import fleur de sel from the Camargue, from the south of France, and we just thought it would be a product we'd share with our foodie friends. We would never knew it would become such a mainstream ingredient, and now you'll find in recipe writing, you know, fleur de sel is called for, just like salt is called for. So it's just, it's different trends, and I think you have to explain a lot more to people now about how you cook. In older days, you just assumed that people knew, and now, you know, your editor's on your case. Is the pot covered or uncovered? Describe, cook it to what point? Why do you let it simmer for an hour? To me, it's obvious you let it simmer for an hour to meld the flavors, but you have to add those additional things all the time, and it drives me crazy.
And next question?
So I think we have enough time for maybe 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Is that all right? And if I could ask for you all, for those 2 questions, to actually speak into a microphone. We're simulcasting this panel, so it won't show up on the simulcast if you don't speak into the microphone.
Those who want to be famous, next question?
I wondered if any one of you could speak to the issue of food allergies growing up, I just don't remember them being such an issue, and wonder what you think the causative factors might be. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think there's a lot of very interesting theories of why there's more food allergies. I don't think I'm gonna talk about that. But I can say that I have to navigate that world as a mom of 2 kids every day. My kids go to the Chilmark school. They can't bring nuts to school. They can't bring peanuts to school. In preschool, there's a child with egg allergy, nut allergy, and dairy, I believe. So you're right. And I think that for me, I still like to expose my kids to a wide range of foods and have them experience them even as babies. I mean, this may sound controversial, but I fed my kids eggs, nuts as infants. And there is a theory out there that if they're exposed earlier and more often, they don't have stronger allergies. I think, kind of as Sarah, you were saying, there's all these rules about feeding kids now, that, you know, you wait till they're 1 to have a runny egg, they can't have raw milk, they don't feed a baby peanuts. And of course, if you have a family history of something very serious, you're sensitive to those things. But I think we also need to kind of relax a little bit.
Yeah.
And, you know, be confident in your family's food choices, and again, kind of trust the human body to be able to eat whole real foods, and you'll figure it out.
Great, and I want to thank everyone at the Martha's Vineyard Book Festival and our exquisite authors. Thank you so much. And thanks to Sue Ellen.
Hi.